My name is Rodney Bell. I'm a consultant for technology management. Question is, following the launch of the declaration this morning, what would it look like when people with cognitive disabilities have full access to technology and information? Well, I think one of the things it would be like is that technology does work for people with disabilities. That's hence the topic of this panel. We'll have some discussion, we'll have a little bit of presentation to start it off. We have with us on the far right, Greg Wellems of Imagine, and next to me, Dan Davies from AbleLink. We'll have a few opening remarks and a bit of discussion amongst the panelists, and then we'll invite the audience to participate with questions or comments. Excellent. What makes technology work? This just worked, so that's good. I've got a brief overview of the things that need to happen and a slide on the things that we want to avoid to make technology work. First, the technology itself must deliver a useful benefit, not just promise it, but actually deliver it. So we have a few examples here. At the top are technology that helps caregivers. At the bottom, technologies that help people with disabilities. And to the right, examples of benefits that we look for. That's most important. If it doesn't do this, everything's for naught. Second, how do we get this technology in the first place? This is the challenge for research and development. In my view, the single most important success factor is that the project must engage and involve actual representative users throughout the life cycle of the technology, from concept through field trials and support. Not just imagine what they would do, but actually see them use it. And lastly, technology doesn't work just because it's out there. The organizations that incorporate it, the providers, the people, they must do a lot of work to get the real benefits out of technology. After all, we just don't want to make it work, we want to get benefits. So we must manage the changes that occur to an organization or an individual in order to get the outcomes, the benefits that we want. And to that point, Greg will have some comments, and to the aspects of the technology, Dan will have some comments. But first, let me point out that it's not sufficient. It's necessary, but not sufficient to do these things. So we must also avoid a litany of obstacles and mitigate various risks. These are some of the things that can cause abandonment, frustration, inefficiencies, or never to be tried in the first place. So a lot of things have to go right, but a lot of things could throw you off course. And we'll share with you some of the insights from experienced developers and provider organizations as to how to make this happen. First, Dan Davies. Dan?
All right. I'll start off here, and Greg and I are each going to just speak for just a few minutes with some opening remarks. And this session is really intended to be real interactive, and so be thinking about your questions as we're talking here. This slide I put together recently for a presentation I did out at Google a couple of weeks ago, and when you think about accessibility for people with cognitive disabilities, think about those doorways into using a computer, the access tools, keyboards, a mouse, trackpads, these are devices that for people with cognitive disabilities can be very difficult to operate. And usually these are the primary means for operating a computer, and in a lot of cases even operating software or different tools that are designed to make computers more accessible. I'll give you an example. Individuals with cognitive disabilities can have great difficulty gaining the content that's on the display of a computer because of reading difficulty and limitations there. Individuals that have vision impairments certainly also have a similar functional difficulty of accessing information that's on the display. And there's lots of software and tools that have been created for folks with vision impairments to access what's on a computer display by using, keyboard shortcuts and software like JAWS and some different tools like that. But the interface that's designed to allow people with vision impairments to access content on a computer display itself doesn't allow people with cognitive disabilities to use that same type of technology to access what's on the display, to have the content read to them because of the complexity of the interface for accessing even accessibility software. So you really have to look at things in a different way when it comes to cognitive disability, because difficulties surround access as well as receiving information from the computer, whether it be printed output, information that's, as I said already, on the display, and even mechanisms that are inherent within using technology that often folks with cognitive disabilities have great difficulty because things like drag and drop, or my slides are moving forward without, there we go, let's go back here. Drag and drop, list boxes, things like that, drop-down menus, all of those can be access barriers. So, David Braddock mentioned earlier that one of the reasons this area of cognitive disability hasn't been addressed as aggressively as some of the other areas of accessibility is difficult. It is hard. It takes a different approach to looking at interacting with computers. And one other thing I wanted to say before I move off of this slide is the, for years, computer access for people with disabilities focused on developing assistive technology for Windows-based computers, desktop-type computers, and Apple computers as well. And in 30 or so years, there's been tools developed for lots of different populations of individuals with disabilities, not so much people with cognitive disabilities. But we're entering an age now where we've got all types of technologies now. There's smartphones, there's tablets of every shape and size you can imagine. So the importance of getting in front of the technology developers and being able to communicate the needs of people with cognitive disabilities for access is of paramount importance right now because of all the changes going on in the technology industry. Because if it took years to catch up for a very fairly stable technology platform with desktop type, Windows types interfaces, you've got so many new types of interfaces out, Android and others, that the danger of folks with cognitive disabilities falling even further behind in terms of technology access is a real danger at this time. Some examples of interfaces, key things to make technology more useful and accessible to people with cognitive disabilities really focuses on, addressing those issues that the previous slide discussed as barriers, overcoming those barriers with interfaces that are very customizable based upon the specific needs of any particular individual. So being able to turn on or off features, and when you're turning off a feature that may not be useful for an individual, it means just removing that functionality from the system and from the screen so that it's not like a grayed out control that someone still might want to try to access. So using pictures, using audio, larger buttons, those types of design approaches are really what's most useful in the work that we've done at AbleInc as well as other organizations in this area. Really provide the opportunity for people with cognitive disabilities to do things with everyday technologies that all of us use technology for: communication, entertainment, helping us get through the day for whatever reason. So the user interface is really the key, and customization that's one of the tenets of universal design that's of particular importance for people with cognitive disabilities: the ability to personalize the user interface based upon the needs of that individual. The personalization of the interface addresses whatever areas. Let me pull these up on the screen so we can. Here we go. Whatever area that the individual is using the technology for. And these cut across areas of communication, entertainment, as I mentioned, and also daily tasks or activities that you would do to just be able to live independently and get through your day. So having the ability to change, for example, how email operates for an individual that can't read or write gives them the opportunity to communicate with technology, primarily because of a different user interface. It's still email, it's still communicating with someone through that mode, but it's just presented in a different way. So understanding what those different ways are is key to making something accessible from a cognitive perspective. Another point I want to make on this slide is, while often there's a real focus with respect to technology in the area of assistive technology on accommodating a specific functional need for an individual to do something independently. That's very important. For example, having the ability to present a set of step-by-step instructions with technology to know how to make lunch before you go to work. That's a great use of technology. But technology goes well beyond functional needs. The needs for communication, just for social networking with others, is a terrific use of technology, and we want to be able to ensure that there is accessible design related to communication technologies that facilitate that social connectedness, as well as just productivity or functional needs. And the third area of entertainment, many of us, probably most of us, use technology for listening to music, watching movies, browsing the web for sites of interest, and the same need and desire exists for people with cognitive disabilities to be able to benefit from all of those opportunities as well. So when it comes to making technology accessible, let's focus not just on the practical, here's what you need to do to get through your day, but here's how to use technology in the same way that technologies are designed to enable access to entertainment, communication, as well as things like independent living.
Dan, just a quick question before we move on to Greg. You mentioned that there's really a continuum of abilities in regards to accessing technology, and presented the concept that accessibility studies may be some way to accommodate that. How do we get the right accessibility settings for a particular individual?
How do we get the right accessibility settings for the
Yeah.
individual? Well, the first step really is understanding what the individuals need for their access to the computer. And once those needs are understood, and that can be through research studies that have been done, or looking at technologies that have been developed that have been successful for folks with cognitive disabilities, it's then a matter of really finding the technologies that have those options built within them. Because if the options for those accessibility settings aren't there inherent within the software, then that particular software is going to be very difficult to make accessible.
Thanks, Dan. Greg?
Good morning. I enjoyed this morning's session, and I couldn't help thinking back when I started presenting, and I was very nervous. It was a large group, and I spoke to a friend, and we all know the adage that if you're nervous and you're speaking in front of a group, one of the tools that you can use is to imagine everybody in their underwear. So when I heard Maggie talk this morning, I immediately thought of you all wearing your cognitive technology. So I was intrigued by that. Part of my role here today is to sort of give you, or talk about technology and how technology works, and maybe where it isn't working, and what the state of technology is from a provider level, from a provider of services. And while our experience is, on the intellectual and developmental disability, I'm confident that this pretty much applies to all long-term services right now, and I think our state is pretty equal across that way. It's with all the changes occurring. Oh, I got it. Here, let me go back. I'm looking at my tablet and thinking it's changing. So I'm in the right place. So in the state of provider technology, we are seeing some growth in this area. We're seeing growth in health and safety monitoring, and specific to that, biometrics, biometric tools being used in a lot of different settings, personalized settings and larger settings as well. And this is geared more toward health and safety. And remote monitoring, it's geared towards funding, it's geared to efficiency of services. The great thing from an individual level is the unintended consequences or the side effects of some of this technology, because some of these technology come with an infrastructure and a backbone that all of a sudden has internet communication, has access to social media sites, it has access to some of the categories that Dan just talked about. And so this technology is being included to make services more efficient, but it's having the category of exposing more and more people to technology, and because of that backbone, about making assistive technology more available. We've also seen more and more apps coming in, applications. And while this is geared more towards the kid world, and we're seeing this in early intervention services, speech and therapy applications, cognitive applications, providers are using these tools, and they're seeing the benefits of these tools, which will extend into the adult services and life cycle changes. There are some problems still. Technology in the provider world, I think, is still a one-off support. There are a lot of regulatory and payment systems still lack incentives in this area. We heard yesterday at the pre-conference session, 1% of waiver money is spent on technology. This is a program that's been around for over 30 years, the waiver services. So 1% is entirely unacceptable. Now, I know a lot of the assistive devices are in the state payments or the state systems, which are even more complicated than the waiver system. So good luck navigating that world. But it still speaks to we have some work to do. We have some work to do from an advocacy standpoint, from a provider standpoint, to get in that area. We have problems with infrastructure. some of the complexity of these applications, some training, and just staff ability or the direct support professional ability to work with technology and when technology changes. I don't know if you noticed, but Apple just did an iOS 7 update, and I lost half my apps. I don't know where they went. They're just gone. Imagine if I was dependent upon those applications. So we have some problems, and it's going to be a question I have for Dan in a minute of you know, we've got to get Google, we've got to get Apple, we've got to get Microsoft to be aware of when they do these changes and make our applications more accessible on a larger basis. Apple certainly leads the way, but when you lose apps, it can create problems. So what can providers do in some of this area? Well, I think it has to be a core service, and I believe it should be a core service. And you have to plan for that. You just can't say we're going to make it a core service. If it's a one-off, it can't be a core service in that area. And as Dan talked about, you have to have an assessment process, and that assessment process has to be person-centered. If you're not asking what's important to and what's important for an individual and assessing them in a technology need, that technology is not going to be successful. So that assessment, why we can do great matching, if we're not including it in the system process and the complexity that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, we're not going to make the kind of progress that we need to make. And finally, there's opportunities to partner. You don't have to. I met with providers yesterday and that are developing technology as a core service, and you don't have to blaze this trail together. Parents want to work together. We have partnerships with universities in that area. So there's a lot of opportunities, and it's a very fertile ground right now. And as I talked about earlier, in a system that lacks incentives, where we have constant change, and we're dealing with constant change right now. We have the Affordable Care Act. There's an opportunity here to make sure technology and technology services and the opportunity to have cognitive support technologies, that if we believe that that's a fundamental right and we're advocating for that, we better make sure that that's part of systems change.
Greg, so before we move to audience participation, and you will have comments and questions, won't you? I'd like to ask, say a provider organization is endorsing the Declaration of Rights of People with Disabilities to Technology and Information. What would that mean for the provider organization? What would they do differently? How would they change?
That's a great question. What you're signing on to, and Imagine has signed on to this concept, is that technology is a fundamental right, that people have the right and access to technology. So what does that mean? As far as I know in this field, we've only had one other kind of declaration like this in the field of intellectual and developmental disabilities. That came out in 1985. It came out of Syracuse. Stephen Taylor was on that, and David Braddock was part of this commission. And that statement said that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have a right to community inclusion. And if you signed on to that statement as a provider organization, or your provider organization, you basically said all the archaic concepts of least restrictive and things that we don't use anymore, of continuum of care things, that people have a right to be included in their community, and at that time the prevalent service was institutions. And we saw how institutions have changed. We saw that this through the Medicaid waiver process and what was happening, we as a provider community embraced these concepts of community inclusion. And now we have a statement that says technology is a fundamental, it's not a service, but it's a right. So if we sign on as a provider organization, that means, well, I'm going back and I'm including technology in my right statements. I'm going back and I'm saying that the training that we all are required to do around individual rights are now educating the people we support that says you have a right to technology. That's a support. And all of a sudden, this comment that I made a second ago, that it's still a one-off support, and by one-off support, we've all had successes, individual successes as a provider of someone using a Dynavox over here, or a speech or some other speech communication or a tablet here. I've heard of all these success cases, but those are all self-contained. They're not a core service where when someone comes into service, they get evaluated of how assistive technology can benefit them. That becomes integrated, that becomes supported in their technology, not in that house or that individual, but everybody that comes to supports to Imagine, we're going to change our process now. We're going to change our procedures. We're going to change our training approaches. We're going to make sure that families and individuals that we support are aware that we believe in this mandate and this right, and they have a right, and we should be advocating for those rights to get them to exercise that.
Thanks, Greg. So, audience participation time. Kind of to get started, because there's so many of you, could I just see a show of hands as to how many of you are providers? Wait till I ask the question. And how many of you are in research and development? So we're heavy on the provider side, and I'm sure there are a few other categories, government and the like. Say again? Oh, yes. Well, it gives us some freedom to discuss some other things. Okay, and now we have microphones set up, and we already have somebody queued up. Excellent. Please go ahead.
Hi. I have a head injury, and I have a great deal of difficulty utilizing technology. And the idea of customization, I think, is critical. The only resource I found available is the University of Colorado Assistive Technology Department, which the last time I checked was $75 an hour to help me customize things. So I've suggested for years to various groups that there be some kind of a tutoring program where maybe college students could spend 20 hours working with someone and help them customize a smartphone and find applications. So first of all, I wonder if anybody knows of any less expensive ability for me to get tutoring so I could use technology. Or what do you think of the idea of setting up a volunteer program to help people with disabilities utilize technology?
Thank you. And the answers don't have to come from us up here. I'm sure y'all have as many or better answers than we do. So if anybody else wants to comment on the question. So how do we enable customization of devices in spite of high cost of consulting or unavailability of people to do that? Dan, you want to take a first crack at that?
Sure.
And please, if you have some other responses, step up to the mic.
Yeah. No, it's a good topic, and definitely. And I think part of the reason that that area is a challenge is because currently technology is not inherently accessible to people with cognitive disabilities. So there is a lot of customization and a lot of changes that have to be made, and it's kind of, they are changes that are not necessarily the kind of the default, the way technology is set up. You have to kind of play some games sometimes to get it to work in a simpler way, and so that does involve organizations like Assistive Technology Partners, who have some expertise in that. I think in the near term, I think your suggestion of having, volunteers that, from a university or somewhere that can focus on providing that type of assistance is a terrific suggestion. The long-term goal certainly is to have the technology come out of the box in such a way that it is set up simply, and then you add additional functionality to and more complexity that you want, but we're not there yet either.
Yeah, and I just, before Greg, if I could jump in, I think long-term the opportunity for those of us in research and development is that the technology be adaptive. That is, it interact with the users in such a way that it changes so that the user can make better use of it. we can see some of this on the websites that change the way they're configured based on the way people are clicking through. But the interfaces that Dan is talking about also need to be adaptive. Now, that's not a help for your immediate concern about customizing devices. So do you have a quick follow-up, please? And thank you for your question.
Well, I was interested in the other
My
gentleman's
response?
yeah.
Well, I have a suggestion for your situation, and I have a comment in general. If you want to, I'll give you my card and we can comment. We have an associate with the University of Colorado. They're actually presenting in one of the breakout rooms. We have a collaboration with the engineering department. We give them a list of projects every semester, and so we can include your specific situation as a list of projects. We're the organization, we help organize it, but they'll do individual goals as well. And this is a collaboration. It's a 200 level class in engineering of ME and EE students that will come out, and if they pick your project, this is entirely their choice. They'll come out and they bear all the costs and they do all the work, and they have 1 semester to accomplish it, and they get graded on it. So hopefully that might work for you. I don't know of a lot of opportunities. Each state does it differently. There is no low cost, no cost service out there that does this that I know of. But it speaks to a larger issue that Dan talks about of the design in general is problematic, and we need larger commercial applications to do that. So.
I also would hope that these technology would be adaptive to the individual in a kind of interactive way. But in the meanwhile, because I've been struggling with this for years,
Right.
A high school student could help me
Right.
figure out what to do if he'd spend 20 hours with me tutoring. So, and I certainly don't mind looking into that course that you have in mind. But I'm saying if somebody would set up a program that would solicit volunteers, even Boy Scouts for merit badges,
Sure.
to spend 20 hours with somebody with a disability, trying to get them to, determine what their interests are. And there could be a very simple manual to do this. So while that course is a great idea, I think the idea is really to set up a program to create an interface between students who could get credit or volunteer credit and people with disabilities, because till we have to wait till the technology adapts itself to our needs, we're wasting a lot of money on Medicare and Medicaid services because people can't make good use of the technology that's out there.
Thank you for the question. We have one comment to follow up, and then we go to Alana and the far side of the room. And there may be even a short way to do that through Facebook groups, special interest groups where people can volunteer. A lot of that happens on websites. People know what the needs, see what the needs are, and they volunteer to help out. And you had a comment, please.
I wanted to let you know that the March of Dimes, if you go onto their website, they have a resource where it's free.
Great.
Your house, you can go to them, and that's what they'll do.
Great. March of Dimes website has a free resource.
And they let you borrow technology to see if it really works for you. If you don't want it, you can turn it back. They have a lending library.
Wow. Borrow the technology, try it, lending library.
So I personally would have difficulty even doing that. I need someone to sit there with me, take me through that process, and make sure that I know how to glean whatever I can from it.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Alana?
Hi, I have one suggestion, and as we've tried to implement technology in our association, we've bought, hundreds of iPads and so on with fundraised money. The big problem actually centers on what this gentleman was talking about, is that we have the technology, we have staff who know how to work with people with developmental disabilities, we have staff who know how to do both. But what we're missing is what occupational therapists used to do, where they would sit down and do an assessment with someone. And I think we need professionals to do technology assessment so that they can sit down with someone, determine what their valued life goals are, and select the technology that would be appropriate for them to be more included in the world, and to also customize the screens by removing apps and that kind of stuff. I really do think that we're going to have a new breed of professional that does this kind of technological assessment and the matching of technology. So that was one point I was making. Another point that I've sort of been wrestling with lately is that when we've got government services that are quite technologically primitive themselves, and when we've got a service provision system that's based on compliance, it's very difficult to push staff into being creative and working to maximize the developmental potential of the individual, because they're so busy trying to be compliant with hours and units and money and all this stuff, that it doesn't really free or liberate the staff to be as creative and responsive when it comes to technological apps as perhaps they could be. So I just was wondering if you had a comment on how do we crack government if they themselves don't understand technology, and how the applications can actually save them a lot of money.
Well, let me, yeah. Way to go, Alana. I think the second nut is a hard one to crack. Let me ask first, though, Greg, to comment on the first one, because I think you have some measures there, and then Dan briefly, and then we'll go to the...
What I love Alana, and I would encourage everybody to talk to her about the kind of outcomes she's achieving up in Canada and what she's working on, and that's what she's speaking to, is an outcome-based system rather than a compliance-based system that we continue to have. If I had the answer to that, I'd be making a lot more money than I am right now. And perhaps I'd be in government. I mean, we have pockets and pockets of success, but one of the problems that we don't have, and this is a fundamental problem with our system, is we don't have good data to influence that change. If you want to influence that change, we have to have better data, and we have to collect that data, and we've got to have people that are out there, that's Bonnie, and that's all of us together, that says, you know, we've got to do a better job of implementing technology and gathering and measuring the outcomes of that technology so we can influence change. Unless we have that, that speaks to people. And I think we have to embrace that challenge in order to move the system along. And notoriously, we stink at it, you know, but we got to do it. We got to do a better job at it.
Do you have a, Dan, you have a comment on either one of Lana's
Sure,
points?
yeah.
Thanks.
Particularly the first comment about the need for, you know, a service really to help implement and make use of, you know, tablet-type technologies and such. I wholeheartedly agree. What has really happened, and it's somewhat unfortunate in the past few years. I mean, while there's tremendous opportunities and new things that can be done, and excitement with things like the iPad and tablets of other types. Oftentimes, that device is seen as the solution itself, rather than part of the solution. You know, it's a combination of hardware and accessible, cognitively accessible software that targets a specific need of an individual, and this is where the assessment professionals you're talking about, and those of you here who are looking for a business opportunity, sounds like there's one she's brought to the table. There is a need for that assessment and that ability to kind of match an individual with the right hardware, but also, even more importantly, the right software to run on that hardware to meet the specific needs of that individual, whether it be a communication need or task prompting type need, that type of thing. there's a great need for that, and just, you know, I've seen it a lot in the last few years where the iPad is viewed as the panacea for assistive technology, and it's like, well, all we have to do is get one of these, and that's going to solve our problem, and they get one, and it's like, now what do we do? And we're still trying to answer the question of now what do we do? So.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
And I think Imagine, for example, has established a new job category in their organization, specifically do that kind of professional assessment of the technology and how to make it fit. So we have a questioner on the far side of the room, please. Thank
Actually,
you.
it's a comment.
Oh, good.
I wear two hats. One, I'm a PhD student at the University of Colorado in the Speech, Language, and Hearing Sciences department, and what many people don't know about speech, language, and hearing sciences is that we also work with people who have cognitive issues, especially after something like a traumatic brain injury. So that coupled with my other hat, which is I'm on the board of directors of a local organization called Brain Buddy, and we are technology focused, and so if you wanted to get a hold of us, it's brainbuddy.org. We regularly meet. Most of our focus is on aphasia, so language problems that occur after a stroke or traumatic brain injury, but we work with lots of different people, and if you wanted to get a hold of us, our founder, who happens to have aphasia, and several other of our members, so we're sort of led by people who have cognitive disabilities and language disabilities. We meet at the Boulder Public Library every other month, or every other week, and the Longmont Public Library in the other weeks. And you can show up with your technology and people will help you set up or suggest apps or talk to you about what it is you're trying to do. And it's very much a collaborative, people helping other people kind of environment. So in terms of that tutoring notion that you have, which I completely understand, I think that may be an avenue for you to try.
Great.
And the other thing I wanted to comment on is somebody said the word tutor. I think you used the word tutor. It's an interesting line because I'm not a clinical person, so I don't have a clinical degree in speech language pathology, but this is exactly my focus of what I want to do. And there's this fine line where doing a needs assessment borders on providing therapy. And given the regulations in DORA and other things in the state in particular, there's this fine line that gets walked between my providing, if I sat down with someone, which I have done, and said, what is it you're trying to accomplish, and meet with them and work with them, there's a fine line where it becomes therapy or it becomes treatment. And where that line is very gray. And it's one of the challenges I'm dealing with right now in terms of trying to provide these types of services to people and not crossing that line.
It's a good point. So thank you very much for that. We appreciate that. And we have one more questioner and then a wrap up because I think we're getting close to the end. Please.
Thanks. First to the gentleman, I also have a brain injury and I use apps to get through life. So after the session, if you want to just talk with me, I'll show you some apps that help me function and share those. I have a quick comment and then a question.
Yeah.
My comment is that it's a testimonial to Dan Davies. My daughter has intellectual and developmental disabilities, and she has been using the software that Dan Davies has been creating for over 15 years. And this software has been the difference between this child having a job and not having a job, and now because of that software she has a job. It's a difference between being able to communicate with her friends when they left high school and went off to college, and your talking email allowed her to continue that social capital and have those relationships in a way that was meaningful to her. And you have really been the difference in her life between living in a congregate care setting and living an independent living. She has a home of her own now with supports, and so Dan Davies, we thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And so my question is, Beth Terrell wants to know what's the new software coming out, Dan Davies, that's going to help her more.
A little promotion.
Well, our website is specifically with communication. Yeah. Well, there's technologies with respect to email communication that in our Endeavor desktop system that have been developed. We also have been working on a Facebook application to make Facebook accessible to people with cognitive disabilities. I'm happy to talk to you about that as well. So just, see me after.
Great. Any final comment?
It's a great design too, his Facebook app. You should. It's wonderful.
Well, we're, I think, out of time. Is anybody here to verify that 10:35 was the end of it? That's a yes? Okay. All right, thanks, Enid. Quick comment. I'd like to thank everybody for participating. It's difficult with a group this large, but we did okay. I think we can see that the challenge remains all the way through the technology life cycle, from development through putting it to use, which is a lot of what the comments here were about. And I appreciate all of you for participating in your questions and following along the discussion, and particularly encourage all of us to endorse the declaration presented this morning as a way of making technology work for people with cognitive disabilities. Thank you all. I think we're on to a break now.